Hello, I'm Jim Denwell with Clark County Close-Up. Thank you very much for meeting with us.
Yes, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So, when did you start as Executive Director of the Children's Justice Center?
I started January 23rd of this year, so just about 6 months ago.
Okay. What attracted you to this position?
Well, the work itself, the Children's Justice Center, is what's known nationally as a Children's Advocacy Center. The intent or the purpose behind Children's Advocacy Centers is that it takes more than just one discipline to respond to child abuse. So it calls for bringing together law enforcement, child protection, victim advocates, prosecutors, mental health professionals, medical professionals to respond. So not one discipline owns child abuse, we all have to respond. And CJC follows that model. Everybody works together to respond to child abuse. It gives us better outcomes for the children and families. It gives us better outcomes for prosecutions. So that aspect of the job really appealed to me, and the Pacific Northwest is a beautiful place, so I was eager to come.
Great. Could you talk to us about the mission of the Child Justice Center?
Sure. So our mission is to work together as a multidisciplinary team to respond to physical and sexual abuse cases where children are involved, and to help reduce the trauma that they're experiencing and to maximize the impact that we have on getting offenders off the streets, essentially. We want justice for kids, and we want to hold offenders accountable.
Okay. And I jumped. What is your background?
I have a master's degree in counseling, and I have my law degree. I had a specialization in criminal law and family law, and so I had this interest of working in kind of the corrections area, the side of things responding to child abuse, and I've done that all of my adult life.
Okay. Now, who operates the Children's Justice Center?
CJC is a program of Clark County, but we are a public-private partnership. So the CJC program itself, we have 9 paid and volunteer staff specific to the CJC department, but we are co-located with law enforcement, child protection, prosecutors, victim advocates, and mental health providers all on site. So our department is small, but our program is much larger.
Okay. What's your annual budget?
It's a little over $1 million a year.
Okay. And that money comes from Clark County, or you mentioned private? Okay.
Right. It is a public-private partnership, and so the beauty of that is, again, we're recognizing that not just one discipline and not just government owns the response to child abuse. This really takes a community response to be able to respond appropriately for children and families. And so we do have money from Clark County, from the City of Vancouver, from the outlying jurisdictions, the 5 smaller cities within Clark County. And then we have a great group that does some fundraising for us. The Windermere Foundation has an event coming up on the 23rd of September where they raise quite a bit of money for us. And then we have a Friends of CJC who helps do some fundraising. And then we always take donations from folks to help us meet our needs as well. We do have 2 grants from the state that help cover part of our expenses as well.
Great. So is there a legal definition of child abuse?
There are definitions that are in every state. They vary, which makes it so confusing, challenging for people to be able to respond. And we don't want people to focus too much if they're thinking about, is this child abuse or not? We don't want them thinking too much on, does this meet a definition? Because that's what law enforcement and child protection workers are for. We really want to encourage people to pay attention to kids if they suspect any form of maltreatment, to make those reports. And some things that they can look for are changes in a child's behavior, if they maybe were very outgoing at some point and they become very withdrawn. For younger kids, if they lose the capacity, some of those developmental skills that they've learned, they lose the capacity to do some of those. If they're frightened or fearful of particular individuals or particular places, or if they have other significant mood changes, they appear different, they have changes in their sleeping patterns or eating patterns, or if they have any kind of injuries, we want people to call. We don't expect that people have hard, firm evidence that children are being abused. It really is just a suspicion of child abuse, and we encourage people to call at those times.
And we're talking about both physical and then sexual abuse.
There are actually 4 forms of child maltreatment generally. So there's the physical abuse, which is that intentional injury, physical injury of a child. There's sexual victimization, which can include fondling, penetration, online exploitation, trafficking of kids, child pornography. And then there's neglect, which is actually the most frequent in numbers in terms of kids not getting their basic needs met that may result in significant harm for those kids. And then there's psychological maltreatment, which is probably the most frequently occurring form of abuse because it accompanies all of the other forms of abuse, but it's the least reported and the most difficult to investigate.
Sure, okay. How large of a problem is child abuse in our community?
Child abuse is an epidemic everywhere. The impact that child abuse has on kids is lifelong. That's not to say that kids can't recover if they've been victimized in any way or abused or maltreated, but there's a recovery process and they need to have help and support in doing that. But we also know that there are lifelong implications. There's research out there that's called the ACEs research, which is Adverse Childhood Experiences. And there have been links that have been found between child abuse, child maltreatment that kids experience, witnessing violence crimes, substance abuse in the homes that lead to lifelong, not only mental health issues, but lifelong physical issues. So we're seeing links between those adverse childhood experiences and cancer and liver disease and heart disease and obesity. So it really is a public health issue, and we all should be concerned because with early intervention, we can help those kids recover, we can get them the help and support that they need, and then we mitigate those costs over time.
What leads to child abuse?
There are so many reasons, there are so many causes to child abuse. One of the things that we need to think about is just our society around us. When we think about games and movies and TV shows that look at violence and say, wow, this is a wonderful thing, or violence is a really entertaining situation, then we're increasing the chances for families to be violent within their homes and then to be violent against kids. So we have that kind of example within our community that normalizes all of this violence. We have these social perceptions of how people should be treated and how they shouldn't be treated. And we see a lot of sexual violence, we see a lot of domestic violence, we see a lot of violence against kids because it's been normalized in these other sectors of our lives. There are also other things that can lead to violence within the home. So if there's a lot of stressors that are taking place in the homes for the families, sometimes drugs and alcohol can play a part in increasing the risk for violence for kids. Not having community members around us recognize the signs and symptoms of abuse and making reports when they suspect abuse, because that can intervene and stop the continued victimization. So there's a lot of things that cause it. There's no one cause for child abuse.
Okay. Is there a typical profile for offenders?
There really isn't.
And that's the scary part.
There really isn't. You can't look at somebody and say, oh, I know you're going to sexually abuse somebody, or no, clearly you've neglected your child. You just can't do that. You can't look at somebody. Child abuse victimization goes across economic boundaries. It goes across physical borders. It goes across all races and religions. I mean, it's present, it's there. And so we can't expect that, yes, this is going to happen here and it's not going to happen here. We have to be aware that it can happen anywhere. We do see higher numbers when we're talking about sexual victimization. Men are more likely to sexually victimize, and it's girls who are more likely to be victimized than young boys, although we do see some of those rates rising. But when we're talking about neglect, we see women that are more likely to be neglectful because they're typically in that caretaking role for those kids. And so it really depends on the type of abuse, and it depends on the opportunities that might allow for abuse to take place within that family.
And are offenders more likely to be strangers or family members?
Vast majority are going to be known to the child. So when we look at all of the statistics that we have out there, probably, depending on which study you look at, we're looking at between 1% and 4% of people who offend against children are complete strangers to these kids. So we're really doing a disservice when we teach kids about stranger danger, because sometimes the very person that they need to approach to be safe is a stranger to them. So we need to get away from that stranger danger type of conversation and recognize that most often it's somebody in the family or somebody known to the family. The person has access to that child, and the rest of the people trust them. Those offenders work on developing that trust so they can have that continued access for that child.
Let's go through a typical case of suspected abuse.
Sure.
How does the center first find out about the case?
Well, CJC is involved in felony level cases of child abuse or felony crimes. So if there's a report that comes in that doesn't meet that felony level standard, then it typically will go out to the jurisdiction in which it happened as opposed to staying with CJC, or it will be distributed to another investigative agency. We also do cases that are both intrafamilial and extrafamilial, so it doesn't have to be a family member. We work very closely with CPS, Child Protective Services, because some of our referrals, if it does involve a family, will come from them. And so we'll get those referrals in from the community or from CPS, and we have a sergeant on site from the Vancouver Police Department that screens over 1,000 cases every year to determine whether they meet our criteria. And so if it does appear as though it might be a felony level crime that the child is a witness to or a victim of, then we will start our case. And so we set up the child up for a forensic interview, and we have a specially trained forensic interviewer who understands the dynamics of abuse and how that child might be feeling and whether they're willing to talk about it or not. Understands issues of suggestibility, because we don't want to plant information in the child's mind. They have understanding of linguistics, so they know how to ask questions in a developmentally appropriate way, because we see kids from 2.5 to 18 and older. And so we really have this very highly skilled person who's asking the questions of this child, and then the law enforcement officer and the child protection worker will be watching that interview from another room, because it's their investigation. They're the ones who have to work it. And then we will have a victim advocate who will meet with the child and the family to talk about what needs do they have. So if they need referral for counseling or referral for medical services or other needs that they have within the family unit, then our victim advocate will work with the family to help meet those needs. Our law enforcement officers and CPS investigators will then take that case and they'll investigate it further. So based on the statements that the child made, they'll go out and interview the suspect. They'll interview other possible witnesses or other people who might have additional information about the child or the offender or the case. And then if they have sufficient evidence, they'll present it for charging. And we have a specially trained prosecution unit within CJC who knows all about the child abuse laws and really works very hard to hold those offenders accountable when it gets to that level.
Okay. Now, how can we stop abuse from happening in the first place?
Well, I think we can talk about this more. I think people hesitate to talk about abuse with kids because they're afraid that they're going to scare the kids. I think that's a valid concern, but there are ways that we can communicate with children that don't scare them. So the first things that we can do is just talk frequently with our kids about safety. Like every spring and fall, sit down and have a conversation about safety. What happens if our house catches fire? What do we do? If you're out riding a bike and you don't feel safe, what do you do? So it's not just the talk about sexual abuse kind of a thing, which can be very scary, but it's in the context of we want you to be safe. And in that context, we want to teach kids about 5 different people. Tell us 5 different people that you can go to if you feel scared or unsafe or uncertain or frightened. Have them actually name 5 people. So there's mom and dad, usually grandma and grandpa. We want somebody outside the family that they trust that they can go to, because if maybe it's mom and dad who's hurting them, we need somebody else. And so we have that opportunity to express that information. We also, when we're talking about sexual abuse prevention, we really want to be teaching kids proper names for their body parts. And the most heartbreaking incident that I can think of as a good example for why it's important for kids to know that they have a penis or a vulva is one child went to school and repeatedly told her teacher that her brother was touching her pocketbook. And she hadn't learned appropriate names for her body parts. And so she was referencing her vulva, but she kept saying, my pocketbook, and her teacher kept telling her, well, just put it away, put it higher. And finally she blew up at this child who kept coming and saying this, that she should be taking better care of her pocketbook so her brother can't get to it. And finally she exploded and said, "But it's right here," and pointed to her private area. And this had been going on for a month or more when she kept trying to make this outcry. So if we can teach kids the appropriate names, we're not educating them on sex, right? That this is their body part. They know they have these parts. So we want to make sure that they have those proper names. And we want to make it okay for kids to say those names, to talk about it. So if there is something that's scary or frightening, that they can do that. And then during those safety sessions that we're having with kids every spring and every fall, doing some what if things. So what if you were walking in the park and an adult comes up and asks you to help find your puppy? What do? Right? You don't go with them. So you want the kids to say, "Nope, I have to check with my mom or my dad before I can go do anything." So you want to implant those kinds of messages as well, that they go and tell a trusted adult, that they know that adults don't ask kids for help and adults don't ask kids for directions. We're giving them those kinds of messages. We're telling kids that when they're not feeling safe or when they're feeling scared or harmed, that they can tell somebody. Those are the messages we need to be giving our kids.
Thank you very much for that. People in some occupations are state mandated reporters of abuse or neglect, but what can neighbors and family members do?
Anybody can report abuse when they suspect it. So if anybody has any concerns, and again, it's not that you have proof that child abuse is taking place, but if you have a suspicion, call 911 if it's an emergency, if it's imminent harm to the child, or you can call. There is a state hotline for Washington and a state hotline for Oregon.
Okay, and the state hotline for Washington is 866-END-HARM.
Right.
And then the number for state of Oregon is 855-503-SAFE. Great, so they can call those numbers.
Call those numbers.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. We'll put those on the screen. Now, you also mentioned that your center also needs donations, things. How can people help the center do its important work?
Because we are a public-private partnership, we do accept monetary donations to help us meet our needs and be able to provide our services. So any donations that people want to make, they can send them to CJC, and they can find the address and information on our website. Or we do have a partnership with the Community Foundation of Southwest Washington, and there is a fund called the Children's Justice Center Friends Fund. And so they can send money there specifically to the CJC Friends Fund, and then that gets passed to us as well. We also take items, coloring books, journals for kids to write in, new large stuffed like plush types of animals. We take clothes for kids when they show up and they have to go to court and they don't have the appropriate clothes to go to court. Shoes, blankets, school supplies, those are all things that we also use. And then magazine subscriptions for the kids who come in to the center so they have something to do while they're there, so it's representative of all different ethnicities. Those are the kinds of things that are helpful for us.
And people can contact the center at telephone number 360-397-6002.
Correct.
And the website is clark.wa.gov/children's-justice-center.
Correct.
Great. Well, thank you very much for being with us, and good luck with this important work.
Thank you so much for having me.